Good morning and welcome to University of Toronto International Summer Academy podcast series. My name is Jelena and I will be your host this morning. In our studio this morning, we have students from Global Citizenship program. And this summer, they're focusing their research on food insecurity and finding solutions. This group in particular chose to focus their research on food insecurity in Ukraine. But before we go into their research and explaining what they found out so far, how about we go around the room and just introduce ourselves?
大家好，我叫妍妍，来自中国。Hello everyone, I'm Yan Yan from China.
Hello， 大家好，我叫仲彦，我从马来西亚来的。Hello everyone, my name is Zhong Yan and I come from Malaysia.
どうもこんにちは、神田トワです。よろしくお願いします。Hello, my name is Towa Kanda. Nice to meet you.
สวัสดีค่ะ ฉันชื่อนัทนิชา อุ่นปฏิชัย หรือเรียกว่ากระจังก็ได้ค่ะ มาจากประเทศไทยค่ะ Hello, my name is Gajang and I'm from Thailand.
Thank you. And once again, welcome. So, let's begin with a current situation in Ukraine in relation to food insecurity. And if you guys can just share the reason why you chose to focus your research particularly on this region.
Of course, I would like to first answer the last question. At the very beginning, it was because the course of our teacher and also the host today, Elena, gave us a video to show. She showed us about Vandana Shiva, who is an environmental activist, on food becoming an instrument of war. At that time, I was just thinking, if food can change the consequence of war, then how will war affect food insecurity itself? We know that food insecurity means lack access to nutritious food, and after a deeper research, I know more information so I can share them with you. I hope this podcast helps you audiences to realize how important and valuable peace is, and find out the method of what we should do to make the world a better place. Are you all familiar with Ukraine? It's a European country which used to have adequate food supply. Before the war, Ukraine was known as the world's breadbasket. It alone fed 400 million people around the world. But as we all know, NATO tried to bring Ukraine into the organization to challenge Russia's regional authority and threaten its security. So, for political and historical reasons, the war between Russia and Ukraine started in 2022. Right after that, there shows a 29% off in Ukraine's grain production in 2023, and also a serious decrease of 22% of sowed hectares. In contrast, I have to mention that the 2.8 million hectares land not sowed is almost as large as Belgium. Actually, 15% of its population nowadays are living in food insecurity, and refugees are now everywhere because of hunger. Even more, problems don't only happen in Ukraine itself, but also it causes effects globally. There is a following 14.3% increase in food prices worldwide, and the noticeable problem is that global south countries, it's a terminology which mainly means the developing countries, are actually those that are mostly affected. And to be mentioned, many of them had lived in food insecurity even before the war began, so the situation is much more serious for them. Only until June 2022, there are 47 million more people suffering from food insecurity worldwide. To make you more familiar with this number, because I know nowadays we're starting to get bored with large numbers, the increasing quantity of hunger is even more than the population of the whole Canada, and still increasing now. I can't judge that all these consequences exist because of Ukraine war, because there must be a few more reasons. But it's pretty sure that this is resulting in horrible circumstances.
Thank you for that. And yes, we are going to be talking about the circumstances very soon. What I would like to know right now is, in your research, what did you guys find in terms of some of the leading causes of food insecurity in Ukraine? And you already mentioned a few of them, but if you can add more to what was already mentioned.
The three major causes of food insecurity in Ukraine that we'll be highlighting today are, first of all, the most obvious one, which is the agricultural logistic disruptions by the war. Second, the economic loss and food price inflation. And third, the internal displacement of people due to the war. For my first point, the Ukrainian region of Kharkiv used to have some of the world's most fertile arable soil. However, much of this agricultural land was destroyed by artillery shells and landmines. According to the International Food Policy Research Institute, over 160,000 hectares of land in Kharkiv have been destroyed, which is equivalent to about 2.5 cities of Toronto. This translates to a quantity of grains and oilseeds that could have fed over 25 million people for a year, according to NASA Harvest. Besides being bombarded, there are other ways that farmlands become useless. These include when the infrastructure that transport food from the farms to the local markets are destroyed, when the farmers are evacuated, conscripted, or killed, or when the supply of electricity, fertilizer, fuel, and water is cut off. Due to the abandonment of farmlands, the quantity and quality of agricultural produce are reduced. Here's an example of a reduce in quantity. Approximately 18%, or 17,000 kilometers square, of croplands were left unplanted following the war. As an analogy, that is 3 times the land area of Prince Edward Island, a province in Canada. As a result, the vegetation loss for wheat, sunflower, and rapeseed crops in 2022 was 37%, 37%, and 36% respectively. For an example of a decrease in quality, the presence and health of vegetation was 11.5% lower than the post-war average level. So these examples that I gave indicate that Ukraine produces less food for the people, and the only food produced is less nutritious. So when so much agricultural produce is destroyed, it leads to my second point, which is the economic loss for farmers. According to a study by a group of students from University of Hong Kong, the direct economic losses for wheat, sunflower, and rapeseed crops were USD 396 million, 202 million, and 95 million. The average crop production cost nearly doubled in 2023 compared to 2022. This causes the farmers to have lower income. To make matters worse, banks stopped providing input on credit for farmers, meaning that banks refused to extend any more loans or delayed payment terms for the farmers. So a combination of a reduced income for the farmers and the fact that the farmers can't take any loans means that the farmers is less likely to afford seeds, fertilizers, machinery repairs, or new lands to replace their damaged lands. So what about the common people who aren't farmers? A basic principle in economics says that when the cost of producing food increase, the price will also increase. So food price inflation increased rapidly since the war. The inflation used to be between 1% to 4% before the war. It was increased to 14% in December 2021, right before the war. And then it shoots up rapidly during the war to a peak of 36% in October 2022. This means that food that originally cost $10 now becomes $13.6. So for my last point, which is the internally displaced victims of war, So when there's a war, people flee from their homes. They will lose their assets like their houses and also their incomes such as their jobs. Without a stable income, they cannot afford sufficient and nutritious food. The war displaced an estimated 3.7 million Ukrainians as of February 2025. Among all the food insecure people, about 1 million are refugees and another million are internally displaced Ukrainians. You might think that why don't they just rely on their savings and selling their assets? Well, that's not sustainable in the long term because these things will eventually be depleted without a stable income. So, to make matters worse, as I mentioned before, many agricultural logistics were destroyed. So the supply now cannot meet the demand, and market shelves were left bare. So, in summary, the food insecurity can be simplified into three things. First, the food suppliers lack produce, which leads to food price, my second point, food price inflate. And at the same time, the food consumers lack income, and all of these factors are due to the ongoing war.
The food effect, Ukraine exported so many foods such as flour, corn, sunflower oil, etc. to outside of Ukraine. However, the number of exporting them is decreasing because of war and beginning destroyed so many farms and also Ukraine's ship cannot ship from the port. That is why so many experts expect that the price will be higher and the amount will be decrease in the world. Especially corn, flour, and so many things exported from Ukraine will be affected. Moreover, the countries that depend on those things are also affected. Inside of Ukraine is also becoming the price of them higher. It might increases the number of people who have motivation. The outside of Ukraine is happening the same as inside the Ukraine. The people living in Middle East countries and Africa is having more nutrition because they cannot import flour from Ukraine. Their staple food is made from flour, such as naan from India, so they cannot eat them easily. For the demographic moves, the number of citizens of Ukraine was decreasing before starting the war, and the rate of decreasing the amount became higher by starting war. There were 44.3 million of citizens in Ukraine in January of 2021. After that, it was decreased for 8 million of citizens, so that there are almost 37.7 million of citizens are dead. The factor of decreasing the citizen is dying by war and evacuate outside of Ukraine, and the decreasing rate of birth. And finally, food is affected the most. So many citizens are suffering from this situation because there is not enough food. Moreover, their house was destroyed by Russia's attack. And also, so many citizens, including kids, are dying every day. And it's painful physically, mentally, and emotionally.
And so I know that part of your research is looking at the solutions. And actually, next week, you are presenting the advocacy campaign where you're going to be looking and evaluating the solutions that are in place right now and also coming up with your own. But so far, I'm curious whether or not in your research, what did you find in terms of the solutions that are already being implemented on both top-down and bottom-up levels? And also, if you can make the connection between the other sustainable development goals and how by targeting and working with zero waste, the sustainable number 2, and working with zero hunger and solving the food insecurity in Ukraine, how is that connected to other SDGs?
So it is a bit more difficult for Ukraine to deal with their food insecurity problem right now because of the ongoing war. Like some of my groupmates have said, the cost of basic foods has risen and in some cases even doubled. But according to a 2024 study by a group of students from the University of Hong Kong, there are a few proposed short-term solutions and also proposed long-term solutions. So a few examples of the proposed short-term solutions include the expansion of cropland production areas, the increase of humanitarian aid, and also lifting the 58 exports restrictions on food, feed, and fertilizers. And although the long-term solutions have been described as a little bit lacking, there have been suggestions on transitioning to more plant-based diets, reducing reliance on imported foods, and expanding agricultural production. But ultimately, the viability of these solutions is very dependent on the loss of arable land and agricultural produce. And actually, some of the current bottom-up approaches that are being used involve community gardens. So in 2022, small farmers have provided for 85% of the nation's vegetable supply. And this community garden is led by a small group of farmers. And eventually it paired up with charitable organizations and is now with over 400 internally displaced people helping tend to the crops. And the current top-down approaches mostly involve humanitarian aid. An example is the EU, which has established an overland trade route between Ukraine and the European Union, which is providing an export path for Ukraine after Russia blocked the seaports, or the Black Sea ports. And there also has been over 3.3 billion meals supplied to Ukraine and also monthly subsidies for around 1.5 million Ukrainians. But actually, we think that food insecurity would also help solve a part of poverty, which is another sustainable development goal. And we define poverty as individuals who do not have a certain amount of money or a certain amount of income. And this can differ in each country. But generational poverty is similar to generational wealth, except it's poverty that has been passed down through generations. And in today's majorly capitalist world, money plays a huge role in determining an individual's quality of life. And it's not to our surprise, but people in poverty are subjected to a life of hardship and stress. And while the cause of poverty is a combination of many factors, food insecurity is a major aspect that we must underline when we define poverty. By not having enough money or having an inconsistent income, people in poverty are not able to afford nutritious food regularly, which leads to hunger and malnutrition, which then affects people's mental, physical, and emotional ability, which makes it more difficult and more demotivating for those in poverty to work under such harsh conditions. Furthermore, many countries have and continue to exploit these laborers, therefore making the escape from poverty much more unreachable than it already is. Individuals who come from generational poverty may not receive an education at all, making finding work quite literally impossible. And this connects back to having no or inconsistent income, further illustrating how poverty within our capitalist society forces individuals into food security and forces them to basically not have a component of human rights. And if food insecurity is solved, a part of this cycle can be broken. With stable body development and nutrition, people can become physically, mentally, and emotionally stronger. A consistent supply of nutritious food reduces suffering, in turn decreasing the severity of poverty, and also in turn solving a part of the problem of poverty.
Thank you so much for not only sharing your research, but also sharing that analysis. And then the deeper we look into the interconnectedness of the sustainable goals, we see that by solving one, we solve so many. So I am really looking forward to hearing more about the solutions and your evaluation based on the 3 pillars of sustainability framework that you've been working on in class, and also hearing about your own proposed solution to this huge problem that we are all dealing with. And it's affecting the whole world. So not only local, but global humanity as well. So thank you very much for sharing your research so far. And thank you to all of our listeners who joined to hear our students' research. And also, I want to take a opportunity to invite anyone who is available to join us next week for the presentations of advocacy campaigns, where we are looking more closely, as I mentioned, at the solutions. So once again, thank you, students, for joining us. Thank you, listeners, for joining us as well. And until the next time, bye.
You've been listening to the ISA Global Citizenship Podcast, which is a component our students produce in the International Summer Academy at New College at the University of Toronto. If you're interested in this program, please visit us at internationalprograms.utoronto.ca.